listening to Combat Sports UK.
Combat Sports UK.
Welcome to Coach's Corner. This is the first episode of our new series where we get the top MMA minds and coaches on the show. They break down the biggest upcoming UFC fights. Today, they break down UFC 313 between Magomed Ankalaev and AlexPereira. We've got the one and only James Doolan. This man has 4 black belts in different martial arts. He is the head coach of higher level martial arts, which is in a small town, Bathgate in Scotland, but they are producing some top PFL cage warriors and UFC talent. James, thank you very much for coming on. How's things, my friend?
All good, mate, all good.
AlexPereira, obviously he's on this undefeated run at light heavyweight. He's looking very, very good, taking on Magomed Ankalaev, whose only loss is actually to a higher level fighter in Paul Craig. This is a fascinating matchup. You know, it's striker versus grappler on paper. Is it as simple as that, looking at it, or how do you kind of see the styles clashing?
I think if you want to dumb it right down, you can look at it like striker versus grappler, but the level both the guys are operating at, it can't be as simple as that. Ankalaev has shown multiple times now that he can fight 15 minutes or whatever without even looking to wrestle once. But there's constant footage of Pereira grappling with legit guys and seeming to hold his own and stuff like that in training and gyms. So I don't think it is. I think in order for either guy to be victorious, they're going to have to probably dip into different facets of the sport that they're probably not known for. I think Ankalaev's probably going to have to strike in spells and then get his grappling working, and obviously Pereira's going to have some form of takedown defence. I wouldn't be surprised if he even shoots. You've seen him actually go for takedown.
Done it against himself.
Yeah. So I think he's smart enough to maybe throw that in there almost like a curveball just to give his opponent something else to think about. But at that level of fight, especially nowadays, like it's no 2004 anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's everybody's got to be well rounded.
As kind of you mentioned there, Pereira throwing in his own takedowns as a curveball. As a fighter, how much of a curveball is that? So if you're Magomed Ankalaev and you know you're the guy that's meant to be heavy in the wrestling and shooting for takedowns, what kind of a curveball does it throw when Pereira does that? Is it just kind of letting him know, right, I might do this as well? Does it change the stance of Ankalaev in any kind of way because he's now expecting the takedown as well?
It's a psychological ploy, I think, more than anything else. Do you know what I mean? He'll chuck it in there just to say, I'm not scared to grapple with you. I'm not going to concede any range of combat here. I'm not going to not grapple just because you're supposed to be a better grappler than me. And it's if you go in there expecting, so these guys are obviously, they're going in there expecting something from their opponent, and if they come out and do something they've no plan for or not expected for, even if it doesn't ultimately lead to victory or even winning that round, it's just something else for them to think about. And when you're in there, you don't have time to think. Like you have to be reactive and you have to be responding and relying on your training and stuff like that. So it's not a bad idea just to throw a curveball in there. Do you know what I mean? Try something a wee bit different and just throw the guy off his rhythm a wee bit.
And what stage there do you think, because it's obviously risky for Pereira to take down Ankalaev, would it be smarter for him to do it near the end of the round, kind of knowing, right, I might lose this exchange, I might end up on bottom? You know, would it be in his head, do you think, I'll do this at the end of the round, I'll throw the curveball? And at what stage does the risk of the takedown become more impactful than the psychological sort of impact of getting the takedown?
There's definitely a time and a place that will reduce the risk. I think if he's maybe backed him up to the fence and strikes and he takes him down against the fence, it's less risky than maybe shooting a double leg or whatever in the middle of the cage, where he's got a bit more space to defend and kind of counter back. Obviously in terms of where you are in the round as well. So at the last 30 seconds of the round, if worst case scenario he shoots and it fails, he's not got long left to see out the round. Whereas I don't imagine he's going to come out and try it pretty early. You seen there was a fight recently with lightweights. It was Mike Davis, actually, who's known as a very good striker, and he came out and he was jumping guard. And you can hear the commentary team actually talking about it, like, we've never seen this film before. And he actually had a little bit of success playing guard because the opponent wasn't expecting it. But there's definitely a time and a place for for things like that to be introduced.
One of Pereira's biggest weapons, and it's what Adesanya sort of talking off the back of his fights with Pereira, the one thing he always mentions is his low kicks. What is it makes his low kicks so different or so impactful compared to a lot of other fighters?
It's the lack of chamber. I think it's no with most of the other guys you can see them coming quite a bit, they telegraph them quite a bit, whereas his is very, very direct. The biggest factor I think is his timing on it is better than most people's. He'll hit the leg when it's loaded, so he'll either get you to step weight on it and he'll hit it, or he'll manoeuvre you either with his footwork or his strikes and put you in a position where it makes it hard for you to move the leg to check or block. And he's just an expert at it. He's also just a big lump. Like you can see, he's a big man. He's got the big hands, big head, big feet. Do you know what I mean? So he's just very, very good at these short range strikes. Even he's better punches and that are travelling a shorter distance than most other strikers.
Aye, because it does seem like, as you say, obviously the leg kicks aren't telegraphed, but something that's even less telegraphed is that left hook. But it seems like it's as if his hands are made of stone. When it lands on someone, it knocks them out cold. And it's with very little torque, it's a very small movement from the hips, but it seems they just not knock guys out cold. Like the one against Jamal Hill at UFC 300, I remember watching that after, and it looked like a flick of the wrist. There wasn't much in it at all, and it was still enough to knock out another light heavyweight like Jamal Hill.
Yeah, it's his technique, first and foremost, and then with the timing added on. But he is special in that he's generating vast amounts of power with a very, very short little movement. Again, this is something you'll see in elite level boxing and kickboxing, but it's yet to make its way into MMA, where the level of striking is still a wee bit behind, obviously, but he's carried over from his glory kickboxing days.
Do you think it will make its way into MMA as sort of the sport grows, or do you think the time it requires to put in the mastering a technique like that, does MMA fighters, they're spread too thin nearly, having to do all aspects of martial arts that they won't really be able to advance to that level?
I think you'll see it coming in. There's other things there that you take for granted in elite level striking. Like the big thing I notice is defensively, MMA striking defense is so far behind kickboxers, boxers and Muay Thai guys. But it's much better than it was maybe 5 years ago. And you're now seeing guys coming in. The kind of gold standard for me is always Jose Aldo. His footwork and his defensive striking's incredible. But you're seeing some younger guys coming through now, and they're getting better at that. And I think it's just the path that MMA striking's going to go on. It's developing at a rate that's pretty quick. You're comparing it to with boxing, son that's over 100 years old. With a vast history. So I think as the next kind of generation of fighters come through, you're just going to see better levels of striking from them.
And on that leg kick, Ankalaev obviously is going to want to shoot for the takedowns. I have heard before that a leg kick is a good thing to kind of stop takedowns because the grappler is so heavy on his front foot. Is that something that Pereira could use here in order to kind of stop the takedowns from Ankalaev as such?
Yeah, but he really needs to be smart when he's throwing it. If Ankalaev's moving him backwards, you can't leg kick. As soon as you go to plant your feet to leg kick, he'll be able to wrestle or step in and counter it. If they're kind of both standing their ground, which is where Pereira's is generally pretty good at, again, it can be risky, where the best time for the throw is going to be try and back him up. If he can back him up, put him on his heels, and then he can boot the leg a bit, it's going to deteriorate his speed of movement. He'll not be able to cover the distance so quick if he does decide to wrestle and set up his strikes and stuff. So I think it will be a factor. It has to be a factor at some point. If I was Ankalaev, I'd be looking to counter it. I'd be looking for gaps to counter it. It has to be at the right time, obviously. And if I was Pereira, I'd be looking at times to use it. So it might come down to that battle where whoever gets the timing right on the actual attack or the counter to attack is going to have success.
Ankalaev, obviously, in the striking aspect, as you mentioned, he's won fights before without having to shoot for takedowns. He fights in southpaw quite often. What kind of changes does that make stylistically to how Pereira would game plan for this, as opposed to fighting another orthodox?
In theory, it takes away the two weapons we've spoke about, the inside low, the back leg low kick. Now it becomes an inside low kick, which is generally a bit easier to block. He can turn his knee down onto that. with foot having to actually move his foot off the mat in a traditional kind of check. The left hook should be nullified a wee bit because his Ankalaev's hand and shoulder is going to be in the way of the hook. But we've seen Pereira use the left hook on southpaws before, again, which is kind of testament to his striking level. But generally, it changes everything in terms of the distance. So the open stance engagement, a southpaw versus an orthodox, generally suits somebody who likes to snipe at range, and they could play longer weapons and stuff like that. And then as soon as you get into like a closed stance with the orthodox, or southpaw, they can work a wee bit easier in the inside. It's a bit safer because the lead shoulder and that's protecting against the power side. But it should be a factor. If I was Ankalaev, I'd be starting southpaw. I do think offensively his striking and his wrestling comes a bit better for orthodox. I think he's probably naturally more orthodox, but he's relatively comfortable in southpaw. But I would go there just to try and take away some of the weapons of Pereira's right out the gate, and then I'd maybe switch. So anytime Pereira maybe has a wee bit of success against that southpaw stance, I would revert back to orthodox just to keep giving him different stuff to think about, and so that he's constantly making adjustments towards me.
How important is that in today's game? We see fighters do it more often now, switching between southpaw and orthodox in different stances. How important is that to give different looks? Is it really off-putting for an opponent if they are constantly changing stances, or is it just something that the opponents even become so norm to that they can fight against an orthodox and a southpaw nearly to the same level?
From experience, I think, see, if it's done right, it's an absolute nightmare to deal with because it just creates more problems for you to solve. And then when you get into a wee bit of rhythm, or you get your reads and stuff, and you start solving the problems, the guy's got the ability to change stance, and straight away everything changes. But from watching a lot of MMA, most guys aren't doing it right. They're not competent enough in the two stances. They usually have a stance that they're offensively pretty good in, and then when they switch the stance, their offense isn't the same. Or they definitely have a stance that they're defensively much kind of more comfortable in and stuff like that there. So there is room to exploit that for the guys that switch. But if you get someone who's trained really well in the two stances, they've got a knowledge of when and where to use it, when to switch and stuff like that. It's an absolute nightmare to deal with. It just makes the striking dynamic so much more complex.
It just gives them more that little bit extra to think about, doesn't it? It's changing all the time. In terms of Ankalaev, then trying to close that distance, trying to get inside Pereira's range so he can shoot for takedowns. What kind of things should he be looking out for so that he doesn't get caught with a left hook on the way in, or get caught by any of them Pereira power punches?
I think the main thing is he's going to have to fake. He's going to have to throw out fakes and feint and try and draw those shots out and then try and get underneath them. I think if he can time Pereira on the one leg when he's trying to kick him, he can get in on the shot there. If he can get Pereira to maybe plant his feet and throw, he could get in on the hips or whatever there and look to wrestle. I think the main thing is when he gets in there, he's going to have to try and get a measure of success the first time or the second time he's in. Otherwise, he'll maybe start losing a bit of confidence on wrestling, and before you know it, he's going to be restricted to being in a straight kickboxing fight with Pereira, which it suits him obviously, and when one guy's losing confidence, the other guy's going to grow in confidence there. But he will need to fake, and I think when he goes, he'll need to time it in a way that he bypasses all his counter shots and his weapons when he's getting in there.
Now, looking at the keys they won, I want you to imagine you're in both these guys' corners. We'll start off with AlexPereira. What's the key things that you would say to him, and how do he win this fight?
I think straight away the pressure. If he can back Ankalaev up, it suits Pereira well. He's got very, very good eyes. If he can back you up, he sees everything and he reacts very, very well to stuff. You've seen it before with him just pulling his head and evading it the way the shots coming in and countering really well. He done it with Roundtree in the last fight, like absolutely beautiful. So I think if he can put that pressure on and then use that to set up his counter strikes, so it's like a very intelligent form of pressure there, where he'll go forward, he'll almost force you to throw shots to keep him off you, and then when you throw, it opens you up for his counter shot. So I think that's the main thing. Obviously, avoid the grappling exchanges as much as possible, or if he can shut the grappling exchanges down and maybe end up in clinch exchanges where he can elbow and knee, that'll work pretty well. I think as long as he's keeping the guy off his legs, should be a factor, which means that he's going to have to negotiate where he is in the cage. He doesn't want his back on the cage where if Ankalaev shoots deep and low, he's going to get a takedown, he's going to jam him in against that fence, and when he tries to build up, he's going to get into riding positions like hip riding and stuff like that.
Then in terms of Magomed Ankalaev, then if you were game planning for him against Pereira, what kind of things do you tell him they go for to get the victory here?
So the first thing's going to be not to concede striking. So I think his best bet would be to go out and strike pretty conservatively, but smart for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then try and get a takedown in the last minute of that round. And if he secures the takedown, he might edge that round. If he loses the round, it doesn't matter. If he secures the takedown, he knows he'll get a feel for what Pereira's got when he's grabbing a hold of him, what he's got on the feet, grappling and on the mat. And if he secures that, he just goes to a wee bit earlier in the second round, and then he'll start accumulating time, control, and he can look for damage and dominate the position. And then again, he could go to it in the third round. But I think if he comes out the gate early, Pereira's very used to guys probably try to shoot on him within the first minute and a half when they're uncomfortable and he puts pressure on them. I think if he does that, it's going to play right into Pereira's hands. So he's going to do that, I think.
Because of the mindset, do you think the fact that Pereira, right, I've stuffed your first takedown, does it just give him that extra sort of boost of confidence? Is that why it would affect him a bit?
It'll affect both guys that way. So if he stuffs the first one, he grows in confidence. If Ankalaev fails the first one, it might start eating away at him. He might start having doubt, letting doubt creep in. And then when he takes away that facet of his game, which is usually very, very good, it's again you're a restricted fighter. You're left with a less capacity in terms of skill set, and you're trying to fight this guy who you're now fighting him in his kind of preferred area of fighting, or his A game.
It is an interesting matchup for sure. Would you say that it's Pereira's hardest fight yet at light heavyweight? Of course, as they knocked him out, you could say that was his toughest fight. But at light heavyweight, kind of in this run that he's been on, do you think it is his toughest fight yet?
I think by a good stretch. I had a look at his record today, and there's no wrestlers on there. So far, the UFC have matched them in fights. They know that they're going to have two guys standing up throwing, and it's going to be exciting. And now they've got a guy who is probably the most well-rounded guy he's fought. He's also just as big as him. He's a big man, Ankalaev. I was at the London show where he fought Paul Craig, actually, and he's a big dude. So I don't know if he's bigger than Pereira, but he definitely couldn't make middleweight the way Pereira did.
No, no way.
So there's that element to it as well, but I think he's probably the most well-rounded guy that Pereira's fought to date, and he's just as athletic as him, which is straight away to the advantages that Alex has had on previous opponents are gone.
At the end of the show, we're going to do a coach's pick, so I want you to give us your prediction for this fight.
So I think this is Ankalaev's fight to lose. I think if he doesn't mix stuff up the way he's capable of, I think he'll lose it. I think he wins on points. I can't see him finishing Pereira. He's been struggling to get finishes in the UFC of late, but I can see him hanging with him on the feet in exchanges, and then being smart enough to introduce wrestling when it's needed. At the same time, I can see Ankalaev coming in there with his ego getting in the way. Again, we've seen fights in the past where he's fought strikers and he's decided just to strike them for the 15 minutes. So I would imagine his coaches have told him like not to do that. Here, there's a risk there. With somebody like Pereira, if you make one mistake, and it's a 25-minute fight, if you make one mistake, he will wipe you out. He's too dangerous to do that. So he will need to be very, very disciplined and mix stuff up. But I think I just think Pereira's too one-dimensional for him. There is talk of Pereira. He's been travelling a lot and maybe not training the way he should be. Whereas you know for a fact, Ankalaev's been waiting on this title fight for a long time. You know he's going to have done everything in his power to turn up in shape and and fight for 25 minutes here.
What's your kind of thoughts on that, looking in from the outside? Because AlexPereira, he's been doing a fair bit of travelling, but you still see clips of him wrestling with different people, training with different people. I don't think he's the type of guy that goes travelling and goes on the drink for a couple of weeks and completely forgets about training. He seems to really sort of incorporate it into his travels. Do you think that kind of has an effect on someone like that, not having a base, not having a camp in one place, and the fact that he is sort of getting around? Or I suppose the flip side of it is he's getting different bodies, he's getting different looks. Is there maybe an advantage to it as well?
I think that suits him. I think it really depends on the individual. I think he can probably get away with that. He's the UFC champion. Wherever city he goes to, he's going to find good people who like train with him. He's going to have access to that. You see him; he's always sparring professional boxers and stuff like that.
Hard sparring too.
Yeah. I think he's always done that. I think it's just the way he's always been him. Whereas you couldn't imagine Ankalaev doing that. You know, he's with his team. There'll be a rigid structure to that you can just tell the way the guy is. It's just everyone's disciplined with him. But I think it suits some people more than others, and I think Pereira, he's been mega successful in the short time he's been in the UFC, so he's definitely doing something right.
Aye, he is for sure. James, thank you very much for coming on. We're going to do this more often. Me and James are going to be jumping on and breaking down the big UFC cards. It's great getting that kind of coach's expert insight into these big pay-per-view events. So thank you very much, James. Make sure that if you enjoy this content, to like, share and subscribe to the Combat Sports UK YouTube channel, and we will see you in the next video.
You're listening to Combat Sports UK.
Combat Sports UK.